Yes, everybody, welcome back to another daily drop brought to you by TarHeelIllustrated.com. I'm Jacob Turner. He's Andrew Jones. And AJ, we're here for a Carolina basketball related drop in this one. And we're just kind of be looking ahead to the next two matchups before Carolina heads out to the Bahamas, what Carolina's maybe looking to learn from these two games and maybe what situations they can be put in over these next two matchups against Lehigh and UC Riverside that will help Hubert Davis know more about his team and help this team develop and grow a little bit, again, heading into a toughest stretch in Atlantis, because that's when things really, really heat up for the Tar Heels and their non-conference schedule. So obviously coming off a season opening win over Radford earlier this week on Monday, I thought the way that game went down was overall positive for the Tar Heels because they had to work for it. So AJ, when you look at these two matchups coming up for the Tar Heels before they head to the Bahamas, what do you think Carolina needs, and what do you think Carolina's going to be looking to learn in these games, again, ahead of a really tough stretch that'll happen when Carolina goes to the Bahamas in a few weeks?
Yeah, one of the reasons I like early season games like this is because there's tremendous value in having them. And there's tremendous value that comes out of playing them. A lot of people look at the punt and say, it's a throwaway game. It's really not, especially when you have only 4 scholarship guys back from last year's team, and you have 7 new scholarship guys on this year's team, 5 of whom played in other programs last year. So they need every opportunity they can get on the floor and play against somebody else. For example, Hubert used 16 lineups the other night. Well, 16 lineups in a 40-minute game. That's a lot. So he's just trying to get a feel for what these guys are like together. You need more than one game to do that. You need multiple games to do that. But I also think the value that they had the other night was that they were pushed. I asked Armando afterward about the benefit of kind of being extended a little bit here and having to play important possessions on both ends of the floor. Defensively, you develop chemistry with the communication, especially since they're switching a lot. And they plan on switching a lot. So you don't just switch because of feel. You've got to communicate it a lot of times. You got to communicate the switch is coming. So they could do it practicing against themselves, but there's so much more value in doing it somebody else. They had the secret scrimmage against Florida Atlantic, and they had the exhibition game against St. Aug's. They got a lot more out of that against Radford because Radford's a significantly better team than St. Aug's, right? So it's communication there. It's running your sets. It's learning to play off each other when the sets break down, which happened a lot the other night. They did well with that. They were awful at it last year at all times. And those aren't just my words. That's RJ and Leakey's words as well. And even Caleb acknowledged it a couple of times. And you just have to get used to playing with one another. You need games, especially with all the newness that are on this, that's on this roster, and the degree of difficulty the games they have coming up. And the other part of that is you want to be well positioned to win some of those games. It's not just about building toward February and March. You got to get some wins because you don't know what the league's going to be like. And the league hurt them last year. And the reality is you and I did a podcast last year at the end of February. We're talking about what Ohio State did.
Yeah.
Ohio State was in next to last place in the Big Ten, but that was Carolina's possibly their second quad one win. Yeah, because they got one over UVA. And then, of course, when they lost, if they would have beaten UVA in the ACC tournament, that would have knocked UVA out of being a quad one win. So they desperately needed Ohio State to win games to remain a quad one win. You don't want to be watching bottom tier teams and power conferences in late February. You got to go out there, get those wins, and stack that resume. So when you get into league play, the league can't bring you down. Yeah. You elevate yourself or you stay where you are. That's why these games are very, very important. Not to mention the fact with a lot of new guys there, you got to get some good wins. And they're going to have opportunities in the Bahamas. They open against Northern Iowa. Northern Iowa is not awful. It's a Missouri Valley Conference team. It's had some success in the past. They'll have some decent bodies. Carolina should win that game, but then they have 2 very losable games after that. They got Tennessee coming up. They got to play UConn and MSG. They got to play Oklahoma and Charlotte. They got to play Kentucky down in Atlanta. I mean, these are a lot of losable games. So you have to get good quickly so you can win some of those, but you also have to have a manageable pace in how you get good because there's so much newness there. You can't force all these round pegs into round holes just yet because they're still kind of finding their way. They're navigating toward those holes right now. So these next 2 games are going to be really important to give them the time together to mesh. And it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if Lehigh pushes them for a while. I think by the time they get to Riverside, though, Jacob, it would probably be a pretty good game where they can sort of roll some and get a good vibe and a good feel going and get a lot of the guys on the bench a ton of minutes. They all played pretty much decent amount the other night, but you'd want to get a guy like Okonkwo out there for 10, 12 minutes in a game like that, have him play with some of the others. You'd love to have a situation where Cadeau could maybe play 25, 28 minutes at the point, and RJ only plays 20 minutes. So you just get them out there and sweat and play together. Yeah. So there's a lot to be gained by these next two games, and it's going to affect how they go into the part of the schedule that's going to shape their resume.
Oh, absolutely. And I agree with what you said. I look at the Radford game and I agree with you. I think it was a perfect kind of first game for this team because, again, they struggled in the first half, but it was a close game in the first half. And Carolina had to work hard to win that game. And we saw some adjustments made in the second half. I think we saw a little bit better of a defensive performance in some aspects in the second half than what we saw in the first. And Carolina ends up winning that game by double digits, feels a lot better about itself. You want those kind of games. You don't necessarily want to be scraping by and winning by 2 against Radford or winning by 2 against Lehigh, but you don't want to just come out and be up by 20 at halftime either. Again, it's a positive if you are, but I think when you look at a new look team like this that's trying to gel together, that's trying to figure out some parts and figure out some rotation, figure out who can be relied upon in some bigger moments, you want to be able to kind of have to be made to work a little bit more for these victories. And Edge, I'll throw this in there too. How much of a positive, we'll wrap it up in a second, but how much of a positive do you think it is that the fact that Carolina has such a big gap in between these games? You're talking about opening up the season on Monday against Radford, that you don't play again till Sunday against Lehigh. That's an afternoon game. And then, following that, you're off until Friday against UC Riverside. So not only some good opponents they're playing, they will be tested, but also very winnable games. But you also have some big gaps in there to get to practice, watch some film, and develop some and learn from some of those things too. So how big do you think that is for this team going into a tough stretch as well?
I think it's good because you get there's a lot of film. You got 16 lineups out there.
So many new guys out there too. Yeah.
You have 16 separate lineups to grade and figure out and show them film of guys together. And I also think it's good because they're trying some different stuff on defense. Yeah. And I go back, and I'm not saying it's not working. I'm just going to use an example. Carolina employed that Wildcat in the first 2 games this year and it didn't work. Mm-hmm. So they had time to pull that out of the offense and add something to the offense. Here, they may not know for sure if their defensive approach works until after they get through the Bahamas. But the other night may have given Hubert a little indication, okay, maybe this group can't do that like this other group can. I'm not a big fan of just saying, hey, we're switching 1 through 5 all the time, because you're going to have guys that can't switch or you're not wise switching with. And I thought they got caught too much with Armando on guard. Now, Armando can guard a guard sometimes, but not all the time.
Not really what you want to see.
Radford had some good guards that were really good at dragging him into the lane and stop him hitting that little fade jumper. And then when they got the defensive pressure pulled up on that a little bit, then they got around him and got to the rim some. Mm-hmm. Carolina did a better job in the second half. But I think they ice more in the second half as well. So they're going to have to figure those things out. Offensively, they just need time. Defensively, I still think they have to work out a strategy, an approach that makes the most sense for them. Offensively, I think these guys fit. Mm-hmm. I think these guys play off each other well. They just need time on the court together. Mm-hmm. So defensively, I think right now is where they need to figure out who they are. And so getting a game, getting a lot of bad stuff on film and some good stuff, and kind of treating it like a football team does by going back and doing the review, getting in the film, getting out there and working on it and trying to figure some things out and doing some tweaking. This gives them the opportunity to do that before they hit the Bahamas. So it's actually better for a new team together like this to have time in between games than if they were just to play Monday, Thursday, Sunday, Tuesday, something like that.
Yeah, you're not able to really practice. Yeah, you're not really able to get out there and work on things. Yeah,
because you don't want to play a game so quickly that what you maybe aren't too thrilled with in one game, you end up doing for a couple of games before you have time to make some tweaks. Yeah, because they have to have their mandatory day off during the week and so on. This way, you really get a chance to fine line some things and make Hubert will know by the time they leave the Bahamas of certain things that maybe he wants to do defensively either work or don't work, or maybe he just use them situationally.
Yeah. And
based on personnel.
Agreed. And that time's invaluable with so many new faces on this roster, man. I think this team's got potential to be pretty good. I like what I saw the season opener,
really
but I think offensively in particular, I'm glad Carolina's back to run and playing that fast paced offense. I think it fits this team a lot more. And I tweeted this out. This is the last thing I'll say, AJ, because we'll wrap it up in a second. It's wild how experienced and old this team is, isn't it? It's just wild. Yeah. I know it's not in terms of guys that have played for North Carolina necessarily, but just, I don't know what the average age is, but you talking about the guys that are in this rotation and playing a lot. There's just a lot of experience at a pretty high level of basketball. So nice rebuild Hubert did so far, I would say.
Average age of the starting lineup is 22.9 years.
Wow. And experienced team. And
heading into the opener, this team had more than 15,000 minutes of college experience on the roster.
It's invaluable, man. It really is.
So, and the thing about it is, it's not just they have guys that have been around. They've got skilled guys. The thing I really liked about the other night was Okonkwo came in at the end, but of the other 10 scholarship guys, they made immediate impacts on the floor. They stepped on the floor like they belonged. Yeah. There was way too much hesitancy coming from the bench the last several years. Mm-hmm. There was not a super confident group. And don't say, well, because Hubert didn't believe him, never played him. It was early on. There wasn't tremendous confidence coming off the bench. So this group is different. This group plays with confidence. They have things they could do. Zayden High made his presence felt. Seth Trimble a little bit bigger, stronger. He's not going to get taken into the lane as much this year as he was last year. Everybody that came in did things well. Yeah. And they could all help this team win. And honestly, right now, if the starting lineup stays the same, how many teams in the country can bring off the bench a 6'10" Jalen Washington, who was a top 25 kid before the injuries, but now it's back to full health and finally had an offseason to work on his game for the first time in a while. Jalen Withers, a 6'9" guy who can play big. He's got skill, he's got bounce, he's got vigor. And he was a captain in the ACC last year. And Elliot Cadeau, who's the top point guard in the country last year. Not bad. Who has those three? Who has those three coming off the bench? Oh, and by the way, in the starting lineup, you have the all-time leading rebounder in North Carolina history. You have a point guard who in the NCAA tournament 2 years ago went 30 points in a game, 12 assists in a game, and 12 rebounds in a different game and getting to a national title. And carried Carolina in the first half of the game against Duke in New Orleans. He was outstanding in that first half. And, oh, by the way, Cormac Ryan has been a captain at Notre Dame and has had some big shots. And, oh, by the way, Harrison Ingram was one of the top 10 players in the country when he came out. And some of those skills that were maybe squashed at Stanford are showing now. And, oh, by the way, Paxson Wojcik was a captain at Brown. His father's a college coach. He's on the Michigan State staff. He was on the Carolina staff. He's been around the game since he could breathe. And the other night, after getting completely pulverized by an Armando elbow and had a gash. I mean, the gash looked like it looked like the state of New Jersey on his forehead, and quite nearly that big. Wore a headband for the first time in his life the other night, and played pretty well. And by the way, Elliot Cadeau played in front of the student section for the first time in his life. He said it was also the first time he'd ever come off the bench. He'd ever come off the bench in a game. So you've got all that, and I haven't even. And then you got your eighth man, someone like a Trimble. And your ninth man, someone like Zayden High. You got Okonkwo there who played in the Big 12 last year. So it's a different group, man. Yeah, and it's going to take time to come together, which is why these next two games are so important to just push everything forward. And they got to push it together at the same time. You don't want stragglers. So it's a tough job that Hubert has right now, moving all these parts simultaneously together while also being ready to take on some of the teams they're going to face here coming up in a couple of weeks. And they're going to face them for like a month. 5 weeks. They're going to play nothing but really good teams.
Yeah. It's a marathon. Basketball season, we always say, is a marathon, not a sprint. And Carolina definitely.
But they're kind of sprinting into the marathon. Yeah, they're sprinting into the grind.
It gets tough quick.
And they're doing it with a lot of new parts. So I think they're going to lose some games.
Oh, yeah.
But here's the difference, and we'll close with this. We don't want to make this a long drop. I said this in the three things the other night. Last year's team lost a couple early games. It knocked them off course, never found their way back. You know, the train tracks here, they're down the side and there's trees in the way, and they think they see the track, but they have no way to get to it. This club, I think, can lose some games over the next month. It's not going to knock them off course because I think their process in coming to a meeting point is January, early February, probably sometime in January. So they're not going to get knocked off course early like last year's team was.
Yeah, and they should. There's so many new faces,
But they need to win some of these games while they're gravitating toward one another. It's good. That's the challenge.
Yeah, no doubt about that, AJ. And again, we'll see what happens over the next few weeks, because after this 2-game stretch, some really tough matchups coming up after that, and we'll know a lot more about the Tar Heels then. But that'll do it for another daily drop. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. Like this video below if you're excited about this Carolina basketball team. You think this Carolina basketball team has the potential to do some really, really good things this year. Again, just like the video below, and let's see how many likes we can run up on this one. Make sure you share. Make sure you subscribe. Hit that notification bell too, so you know every single time we upload. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.
Thanks.